Welcome to Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, just to hear it out loud. Join Toby Malone and TJ Young, along with some special friends, as we puzzle our way through what we once thought was an unreadable book to produce a surprisingly listenable podcast. It is Wednesday, June 19th, 2024. It has been 34 days since we've started reading, with 113 pages complete of 628, meaning we have 515 pages left to go and are 17.99% of the way through Finnegan's Wake. Hi everyone, Toby here, just giving you a quick update to catch you up. This is your first episode of Wake. I have no idea why you're starting in episode 10, but you do you. Last week we had a special guest, Neil Wechsler, who came in to read both for episodes 9 and 10. So this is a continuation on last week's episode. We didn't do any analysis that week. We're going to be doing it this week, but we're also not going to be doing a preamble of this episode. So, as always, we're reading from the Penguin Modern Classics edition of Finnegan's Wake, published in 2000 with a foreword by Seamus Dean. We're going to be reading the second half of chapter 15 from pages 113 to 125 in this edition. This is a segment that is titled The Mama Festa, a new focus for the investigation, The Letter, by the Oxford World's Classic edition of 2012, which also includes brief summaries of what's happening in each subsection, which we will address at the end of the reading. So, without further ado, Finnegan's Wake.
Let us now weather health dangers, public orders, and other circumstances permitting of perfectly convenient, if you police, after you, police, pardoning mine, ich beam so fresh, bay. Drop this jiggery pokery and talk straight turkey meat to mate, for while the ears, be we Michaels or Nicholists, may sometimes be inclined to believe others the eyes, whether brown or no lens, find it devilish hard now and again even to believe itself. Habes oris et num vidibus, habes oculus, ac mana palapapuat? Tip, drawing nearer to take our slant at it, since after all it has met with misfortune while all underground, let us see all there may remain to be seen. I am a worker, a tombstone mason, anxious to please Avery berries and jolly glad when Christmas comes as once a year. You are a poor joist, unctuous to police nope bobbies, and tunnabelly solely when 'tis thime took o'er gin. We cannot say eye to eye, we cannot smile nose from nose. Still, one cannot help noticing that rather more than half of the lines run north-south in the Nemzis and Bucharest directions, while the others go west-east in search from Malaziz with Bulgard for Tiny Tot, though it looks when Schutzplunzning alongside other Incunabala, it has its cardinal points for all that. These ruled barriers along which the traced words run, march, halt, walk, stumble at doubtful points, stumble up again in comparative safety, seem to have been drawn first of all in a pretty checker with lampblack and blackthorn. Such crossing is anti-Christian, of course, but the use of the homeborn shillelagh as an aid to calligraphy shows a distinct advance from savagery to barbarism. It is seriously believed by some that the intention may have been geodetic, or, in the view of the cannier, domestic economical. But by writing thitherways end to end, and turning and end to end hitherways writing, and with lines of litters slithering up, and louds of ladders sluttering down, the old seem to my place, and jup it back again. From them let rise till humlet, sleep, where in the waste is the wisdom. Another point, in addition to the original sand, pounce, powder, drunkard, paper, or soft rag used, any vet or in hanger, and such social can see the scene for himself, a wee 50-odd room, the cheery spluttered on the carrig, a dark sheen of booze from Dalbania, any got quantity of rakia Portugal, and some buck setting out on the sofa. You remember the sort of softball sucker Mojo used to tell us when we were all burby-ass or nippies and messes. It has acquired accretions of tertious matter whilst loitering in the past. The tea-time stained terminal, say not the tag, mummer, or our show's a failure, is a cozy little brown study all to oneself, and whether it be thumbprint, maidmark, or just a poor trait of the artless, its importance in establishing the identities in the writer complexus. For if the hand was one the minds of active and agitated, or more than so, will be best appreciated by never forgetting that both before and after the Battle of the Boyne, it was a habit not to sign letters always. Tip. And it is surely a lesser ignorance to write a word with every consonant too few than to add all too many. The end? Say it with missals then, and thus arabesque the page. You have your cup of scalding souchong, your taper's waxen drop, your cat's paw, the clove, or coffin nail you chewed or champed as you worded it, your lark in clear air. So why, pray, sign anything as long as every word, letter, pen stroke, paper space is a perfect signature of its own? A true friend is known much more easily, and better into the bargain, by his personal touch, habits of full or undress, movements, response to appeals for charity than by his footwear, say. And speaking in Tiberius and other incestuous salacities among Gerontophilus, a word of warning about the tenderloin passion hinted at. Some soft-nosed peruser might mayhem take it up erogeously as the usual case of spoons. Prostituta in erba, plus dinky pinks deliberatively somersaulting off her bisexical at the main entrance of curate's perpetual soutane suit with her one to see and a woe who picks her up as gingerly as any bomb-bearer would to feel whereupon the virgin was most hurt and nicely asking, "Why have you been so grace a-mauling, and where were you chased, me child? Be who farther potential and so wider, but we grisly old psychos who have done our unsmiling bit on Alice's? When they were young and easily Freudended in the penumbra of her procuring room, and what oracular compression we have had applied to them, did we care to sell our fee-bought silence in camera, till our very moist-nostrilled one that father in such virgated context is not always that undemonstrative relative, often held up to our contumacy, who settles our hash bill for us. And what an innocent all-abroad's adverb, such as Michele looks like, can be suggestive of under the pudenoscope. And finally, what a neurasthene, nympholept, endocrine, pineal typus of inverted parentage, with a prepossessing drama present in her past, and a preapic urge for Congress, with agnates before cognates, fundamentally is feeling for under her lubricatous meiosis when she refers with liking to some feeler she fancies face. And we could, yes, what need to say? 'Tis as human a little story as paper could well carry. In effect, as Sing Sing to Salaman suing to Swit vitals, while as unbluffingly blurt or brusque blunt as in Ezra the cat's meter cat's wife, the meter cat's wife half better, the meter cat's wife's half better's meter, and so back to our horses. For we also know what we have perused from the pages of I Was a Gamrail, that shoting up of Bolsclivism by Schottenbaum, that Father Michael, about this red time of the White Terror, equals the old regime, and Margaret is the social revolution, while cakes mean the party funds and dear thank you signifies national gratitude. In fine, we have heard, as it happened, of Spartacus Intercellular. We are not Corknerd yet, dead hand. We can recall with volunteers the froggy Jew, and sweeter far 'twere now West thinks in Dumble's fair city ere one more year is o'er. We turned our coats to the good gay tunes, when from down swords the sea merged, the old Delph guns an answer made the bold O'Dwyer, but, est modest in verbos, let a prostitute be whoso stands before a door, and winks or parks herself in the fornix near a May-cussin wall, sin, and the curate one who brings strong waters, gin, but also, and dinna forget, that there is many a sleeps between some at home's first and more in Oslin's last, and that the beautiful presence of waiting cates will into life's be more than enough to make any milk Mike in the language of sweet tarts punch hell's hate into his twin Nicky, and that Maggie's tea or your majesty, if heard as a boost from a born gentleman. For if the lingo gasped between kick sheets, however basically English, were to be preached from the mouths of wicker church wardens and metaphysicians, row and advocatos, all views, demi-voyelles, langoths, lesbiels, dentels, gutter howls, and furts, where would their practice be? or where the human race itself, were the Pythagorean sesquipedalia of the Panoptestemion, however apically Volapaki grunted and gromwelled Ichabod, Habakkuk, Openoff, Ogimig, Hapaxel Gomenon, over country stiles, behind slated dwelling houses, down blind lanes, or when all fruit fails, under some sacking left on a coarse cart.
So hath been, love, tis, and will be, till wears and tears and ages. Thief us the night, steal we the air, shall thinner lifest mine. Here, oh here, insult the fair. Traitor, bad hearer brave. The lightning look, the birding cry, all from the grave, ever flowing on the times. Fragarasaria, or Arden water. Now God's sun shine on Menday's daughter. A good clap, a foremarriage, a bad wake. Tell hell's well. Such in man a wife's lot of loss and win again. Like he's grudden whiskers on whose chin again she plucketh from out, but they grow in again. So what are you going to do about it? Oh dear. If Junus she shaved, aho! And if Eulon he poved the old stolium from quaint to mich chelt and a jambasty to a brulo. It is told in sounds and utter that, in signs so adds to, and universal, in polyglottal, and each auxiliary neutral idiom, sordid mutix, floria lingua, sh- shaltofocal, flay flutter, a cons Cuban, a pros toot, strusser robe, irips resi, and any tongue at all. Since Nazi Nati tripped palm ways with hi ho Harry, there's a spurt fire, turf a kind o kindling, when oft as the soof blows her peats up and a clay pot wet for thee, my sits and talka talka till Tibbs has Eve. And what though, revelous life proving I the death of Rondulus when wind power wine has bucked and kicked on poor one man. Billioness has been billioness during millenniums and millennius, and our mixed racing have been giving two hoots or three jeers for the grape. Vine and brew, and Peters and New Amsterdam and Palais and Paolis, where the Poles go and rum smelt, has his end for him, and he dined off soothe American. It would give one the frere even were one a normal kettle liquor. This old well espitole of their weatherings and their marryings and their buryings and their natural selections has come tumbled down to us fresh and a made at all hours like an old cup of tea as I was hotten me sore. Ha ha! And as you was called in your Dutchy hovel. Ho ho! You told the tale of her tune. Ha ha! Now, Captain Mancy, the infusionism may both fit as tight as two trivets, but while we in our wee free state, holding to that prestitute of our charter, may have our irremovable doubts as to the whole sense of the lot, the interpretation of any phrase in the whole, the meaning of every word of a phrase so far deciphered out of it. However unfettered our Irish daily independence, we must vaunt no idle uh, dubiousity as to its genuine authorship and whole bolus authoritativeness, and let the bring the cease to bickerings on the clank almond bolter, and to the face of it, the volt to volt back to our desultory horses, and for the Rashad mind, baffle lost bull, the affair is a thing once for all done, and there you are somewhere and finished in a certain time. be it a day or a year, or even supposing it should eventually turn out to be a serial number of goodness gracious alone knows how many days or years. Anyhow, somehow and somewhere, before the book flood and after her ebb, somebody mentioned by name in her telephone directory Colonius and Glasterus wrote it all down, and there you are, full stop. Oh, undoubtedly yes, and very potibly so, but one who deeper thinks will always bear in the ba- barbacus of his mind that this downright there you are, and there it is only all in his eye. Why? Because Babel. If it goes to that, the dormy window gossip will cry it from the housetops. No, surely that the writhing of the wall will hew that the writing on the wall will hew it to the mod of men that mote in the main street. Every person, place and thing and the chaosmus of ale anyway connected by the gobbly dumped turkey of the moving and changing every part of the time, the traveling inkhorn, possibly pot, and hair and turtle pen and paper, and continuously more and less intermisunderstanding minds of the anti-collaborators, as time went on, it will variously inflected, differently pronounced, otherwise spelled, changeably meaning vocable script signs. No, so hope me patulant. It is not a miseffectual and Tharnius riot of blots and blurs and bars and balls and hoops and wriggles and juxtaposed jauntings linked by spurts of speed. It only looks like it as damn it. And sure, we ought really to rest thankfully that it at this deleteful hour of dungful dawnings we have even a written on with dried ink scrap of paper at all to show for ourselves. Tear it or leaf it, and we are loofed lefted to ourselves as Soul Fisher when we led the cat out of the bout. After all that we lost and plundered of it, even in the hindmost coinings of the earth, and all it has gone through, and and by all means, after a good ground kiss, the terracotta, and for war's luck often are left tours flung over our homo plate, cling to it as a drowning hands, hoping against hope all the while that, by the light of philosophy, and may she never fall saying us, things will begin to clear up a bit, one way or another, within the next quarrel of an hour, and be hanged to them as 10 to 1 they will too, please the pigs, as they ought to categorically, as strictly between ourselves, there is a limit to all things, so this will never do.
Or, with that farm frow's foul flair for that flay-fell fox fator, the calamites columnitas calling for calamitous calmitants, who that scrutinizing marvels at those indignant whip-loop lashes, those so prudently bolted or blocked rounds, the touching reminiscence of an incompleted trail or a dropped final, a round thousand whirligig glorioles, prefaced by, alas, now illegible airy plume flights, all Tiberiously bellishing the initials magic school of Earwicker, the meant to be baffling Chrismon Trilocine, finally called after some hesitancy, heck, which move construct watch like represents his title in sigla as a smaller triangle. Fondly called following a certain change of state of grace of nature, alp or delta, when single stands for or tautologically stands beside the consort. though for that matter, since we have heard from Cathay circles how the hen is not merely a tick or two after the first, fifth, fourth of the second, eighth, 12th, Siang, Chang, Hong Kong, San Chinil, but yarely on the other and 30th of the 9th from the 20th, our own vulgar 432 and 1132, irrespectively, why not take the former for a village inn, the latter for an upside-down bridge, the multiplication marking for crossroads ahead, which you like pot-hook for the family gibbet, their old four-wheeler for the bucket's field, a tea anyway for a tryst some day, and his one side missing for an all-blind alley leading to an Irish plot in the Champ de Mars, not the steady monologue of the interiors, the pardonable confusion for which some blame the cudgel and more blame the soot, but unthanks to which the peas with their caps awry are quite as often as not taken for cues with their tails in there, or are quite as often as not taken for pews with their tails in their mouths, since your Christopher Palombos, hence our cat Presbyterians, the curt, witty, watty dashes, never quite just right in the trim, trite truth letters, with sudden spluttered petulance of some capitalized middle, a word as cunningly hidden in its maze of confused drapery as a field mouse in a nest of coloured ribbons. That absurdly bull's-footed bee declaring with an even plainer dumb show than does the mute commoner with us, how hard a thing it is to pawn a gentleman, to look at this pre-promonomial funferal, engraved and retouched and edge-swiped and puddin'-patterned very much like a whale's egg fast with pemmican, as were it sentenced to be nuzzled over a full trillion times forever, and a night till his noddle sink or swim by that ideal reader suffering from an ideal insomnia. All those red-rattled oboli, cayenne pepper cast over the text, calling unnecessary attention to errors, omission, repetitions, and misalignments, that, probably local or personal, variant maggers for the more generally accepted majesty, which is but a trifle, and yet may quietly amuse, those supercilious-looking criss-crossed Greeks east awkward-like perched there, and here out of date like sick owls hawked back to Athens. And the Gigis, too, Jesuitically formed at first, but afterwards genuflected agrally toward the Occident. The Austro-Gothic cacography affected for certain phrases of Etruscan stable talk, and in short, the learning betrayed at almost every line's end, the head strength, at least 11 men of 32 paltry craft, revealed by a constant labour to make a gymel pass through the eye of an iota. This, for instance, utterly unexpected synestragic return to one peculiar sore point in the past. Those thrown open W's of an early modern Terranian origin, whether man chooses to damn them agglutinatively loo, to, blue, face, ache, or il-vu-dol pee-hole, or Kant's court topple-fowls. Seated with such flop-right-down determination and reminding us ineluctably of nature at her naturalist, that while fretful fidget F, the hornful diajammer of your born Barnabar, rarely heard now save when falling from the unfashionable ellipsis of some heterosexual, used always in two bold-faced print types, one of them as wrong-headed as his Claudian brother, is it worth while interrupting to say, throughout the papyrus as the revise mark, stalks all over the page, broods sensation-seeking and ideal. Amid the verbiage, Gaunt stands dejectedly in the diapered window margin, with its basque of bay leaves all aflutter about its forks frogs, paces with a frown, jerking to and fro, flinging phrases here, there, or returns inhibited, with some half-halted suggestion, dragging its shoestring, the curious warning sign before our proto-parents ipsissima verba, the very pure nondescript, by the way, sometimes the palm-tailed otter, more often the arbutus flute-flower leaf of the cane apple, which paleographers call it a leak in the thatch or the Ironman imperquis through a hole of his cat, indicating that the words which follow may be taken in any order desired, whole of Aaron Man the hat through the whispering his ho. Here keen again and begin again to make sound sense and sense sound kin again. Those haughty pitched dis-dotted H's easily of the rarest inner stroll, as most of the jaywalking eyes we do plough into halve, unconnected, principal, medial, or final, always Jims in the jam, sahib, as pipless as threadworms, the innocent exhibitionism of those frank yet capricious underlinings, that strange exotic serpentine, since so properly banished from our scripture, about as frequing a wetter hand now as to see a right-headed lady white don a cork horse, which in its invincible insolence, ever longer more and of more morosity, seems to uncoil spirally and swell lacetine lazily before our eyes under pressure of the writer's hand. The ungainly musicianlessness so painted in sculpting self-sounder, aha, as black artful, as a pedatus and dumbfounder, oh ho, uproarious, as 10 cannons in skelterfuge, the studious omission of year, number, and era, name from the date, and the one and only time when our copyist seems at least to have grasped the beauty of restraint, the lubricitious conjugation of the last with the first, the gypsy matting of a grand stylish grave digging with second-best buns, and interpolation. These munchables occur only in the Butherbrow family of manuscripts, B. Cod 4, Pap 2, Breck 11, Lun 3, Din 17, Sup 30, Full Up, MD, XC. The scholiast has hungrily misheard a dead man's rotola as a muffin bell. The 4 shortened ampersands under which we can glimpse at and feel for ourselves, across all those rush years the warm, soft, short pants of, the quick scribbler, the vocative lapse from which it begins and the accusative hole in which it ends itself, the aphasia of that heroic agony of recalling a once-loved number leading slip by slipper to a general amnesia of misnomering one's own, next those R's, those R's all bellical, the high priest's hieroglyph of Kettle Tom and Oddsbones, rusted red-handedly from our hallowed rubric prayer for Bruce with booty, O Remus pro Romulo, and rudely from the fame's pinnacle, tossed down by Porter, to within an aim's ace of their quatrain of ruby jets, among those who arse without the temple, nor since Rose Distillery burned have quaffed night's fire-filled cups, but jig-jog-jug as day the dice blocks throws. Whang! Royal 6 I lead, out we have hearts blued, blast ye, and there she for you, sir, whang her, the fine ooman, rouge to her lobster locks, the Rossi, whang, and God and Mara has it with his ruddy old villain Rufus, wait, whang, God and you're another, he hasn't for theirs my spoil, 5 spuds trumps, whang, whack, hasn't for theirs my spoil, whack on his pigskins kisser for him, K.M. O'Mara, where are you? Then, coming over to the left aisle corner down, the cruciform postscript from which 3 baser or shorter and smaller oscula have been over-carefully scraped away, plainly inspiring the tenebrous kunk page of the Book of Kells. And then it need not lost sight of that there are exactly 3 squads of candidates for the Crucian Rose awaiting their turn in the marginal panels of Column Killer, chugged in their 3 ballot boxes, then set apart from such hanging committees, where 2 was enough for anyone, starting with old Matthew himself, as he with great distinction said then, just as since then people speaking have fallen into the custom, when speaking to a person, of saying 2 is company when the 3rd person is the person darkly spoken of, and then that last labiolingual basium that might be read as a suavium if whoever the embracer then was wrote with a tongue in his, or perhaps her, cheek, as the case may have been then, and the fatal drupad windle slope of the blamed scrawl, a sure sign of imperfectible moral blindness, the too muchness, the far too manyness of all these 4-legged M's. And why spell dear God with a big thick D? Oh why, oh why? Oh why? The cut and dry axe and wise form of the semi-final and 18thly or 24thly, but at least, thank Maurice, lastly, when all is zed and done, the Penopelian patience of his last paraph, a colophon of no fewer than 732 strokes tailed by a leaping lasso, who thus at all this marvelling will press on hotly to see the vaulting feminine libido of those interbranching Ogham sex, up and in sweep sternly controlled and easily repersuaded by the uniform matter-of-factness of a meandering male fist?
Tough Mugly, who now may be quoted by very kind arrangement. His dectrophonious photosynthesis under supersonic light control may be logged for by our none too distant futures as soon as stone values can be turned up from chromophilomus limited at a millicent time to the microamp. First called this kind of Paddy-Go-Easy partnership the Ulkihine or Tetrachiric or Quadrumane or Duck and Drakes or Debts and Dishes Perplex, versus some forestallings over that studium of sexophonologistic schizophrenis, volume 24, pages 2 to 555. After the well-informed observation, made miles apart from the master by tongue-toyed, cf. Later frustrations amongst the neo-Muglian teachings abaft the semi-unconscious passim, that in the case of the little-known paraplic bestseller popularly associated with the names of the wretched mariner, Tryon Foran Defweedoff, our plum-sucked pattern shapekeeper, a Punic Admiralty report from McPherson's Ocean round by the tides of Jason's cruise, had been cleverly capsized and saucily republished as a Dodocannesian Baedeker of the every tale a treat in itself variety, which could hope satisfactorily to tickle me gander as game as your goose. The unmistaken identity of the persons in the Tiberius duplex came to light in the most devious of ways. The original document was in what is known as Hanno Ononohano's unbrookable script. That is to say, it showed no signs of punctuation of any sort. Yet on holding the verso against a lit rush, this new book of Morses responded most remarkably to the silent query of our old world's oldest light, and its recto let out the piquant fact that it was but pierced but not punctured, in the university sense of the term, by numerous stabs and foliated gashes made by a pronged instrument. These paper wounds, foreign type, were gradually and correctly understood to mean stop, please stop, do please stop, and oh, do please stop, respectively, and follow up their one true clue. The circumflexuous wall of a single-minded men's asylum, accentuated by so rock ingle asen Yard inquiries pointed out that they had been provoked I fork of a grave professor at that Breek's fast table, acutely professionally piqued to equal introduce a notion of time upon a plane, su facie by punt ingolistic in space, deeply religious by nature and position, and warmly attached to thee, and smear bread, and better in him and new laid illis, it was rightly suspected that such ire could not have been visited by him, brought Professor Prendergast, even underwittingly, upon the ancestral pneuma of one whom, with Ruma, he venerated shamelessly at least once a week at Cockspur Common, as his apple in his eye and her first boy's best friend, and though plain English for a married lady misled heaps by the way, yet when some peer or peeress detected that the four-leaved shamrock or quadrifoil jab was more recurrent wherever the script was clear and the term terse, and that these two were the self-same spots naturally selected for her perforations by Dame Partlet on her dung-heap. Thinkers all put groan in her water, rung spillful, prate land only in a playful foul and a musical me, and not you in any case, two and two together. And with a swarm of bisses honey hunting after a sigh for shine, oh, the petty bonny rouge, separated modest mouths. So be it, and it was. The letter making of the exploits of Fjorn Camelson when he was in the Gvinnis country with soldiers' men. With acknowledgment of our fervor, of the first instant he remains years most fainfully. For postscript sea spoils, though not yet had the sailor sipped that sup, nor the humpar foamed the fill, and fox and geese still kept the peace round l'auberge du Père Adam. Small need after that, old Jerome Solem, old Huff Snuff, old Andy Cox, old Cassandrum, for quizzing your weekenders come to the RQ with, shoots off in a hiss, muddles up in a muss mass, and is holds a dismantled noon drunkard's son. Howbeit we heard not a son of sons, to leave by him to oceanic society in his old man without a thing in his ignorance, Tulko Makuli. And it was thus he was at every time, that son, and the other time. The day was in it, and after the morrow dire mood, as the name is on the writing chap of the Psalter, the juxtajunctor of a dear mate, and he passing out of one desire into its fellow. The doctors are after going and lodging for him. Torba's nice lookers of the fair neck, wanted for millinery servants to old Early's person by the Tati Askins is formerly confounded with a mother. Maybe growing a mustache, did you say, with an adorable look of amusement? And uses no-class billiard halls with an up-and-down ladder? Not Hans, the courier, though had he had have only had some little laughings and some less of cheeks, and were he not so worried by his bulb of persecution, he could have, I, and would have, as true as Essex Bridge, and not go fef go gossip, I declare to man, no, to all's much relief, one's half hypothesis of that jabberjaw ape amok the showering chestnuts of Brusinose was hotly dropped, and his room taken up by that odious, and still today insufficiently mal-estimated note-snatcher, cac, fui, boshin fiati, much ernie, Gus, Poutine, says you, Shem the penman.
That was the first and second halves from last week and this week of chapter 1-5 from Finnegan's Wake. TJ, immediate reactions.
I'm mad at my brain because we talked about how sometimes your brain goes to a place where you're just like, I'm just saying the word. I'm not trying to find meaning. This time my brain was like, no, figure it out on the fly. That being said, I think that it's indicative of us just getting into the book where we want to find the meaning and everything, as opposed to like when we first started, we're like, we don't know what's happening. And now that we have some sort of context and we're starting to pick up on patterns, I'm looking for them. Yeah, and my brain is also like, break apart every portmanteau, find every way that it works from a poetic sensibility. Which I also realized I was like, I do in my own poetry. So I'm like, what is he doing here? What is he doing here? Yeah, and Neil could read me the phone book. Like, that was luscious.
Yeah, I'm here to say, like, yeah, methinks the lady did protest too much. Before we started, Neil's like, well, you know, my reading's not going to be very good and I'm very nervous. You're coming for our job, I think.
I was about to be like, Toby, I'm so sorry I failed you. Neil is not your new co-host.
Remember, next week, people are going to listen to our episode and be like, too much Toby and TJ. Where's that Neil? I want him back.
There is a real fear, and I mean, obviously having read it a couple times and knowing the work really well helps with that, right? It's also, but there is the fear. I mean, I hear you say that, but I'm not going to be convinced until I actually hear it, because I think what I mentioned to you at the beginning was, when I read this, there's like a real clarity in it when I read it. Like I feel like I get it and I move through it. But this is often a problem when I try to present something like this, is that, and I did think about this before I did this. So if I did do a good job, thankfully, because I know how bad I can do with something like this. I recorded myself actually last night doing this. Okay, how's this going to work? So I recorded it, and the first one default is just like, okay, I'm not going to try to do too much emotion. I'm just going to kind of read the word. But then it comes across as this very kind of like monotone thing, which doesn't work. The other end I go to is like, I get really into it, but then I literally sound like a psycho, right? And so part of this is, so I was thinking to myself, and maybe this is like to capture what TJ was saying in terms of like, well, is there meaning in this? And like, how not, we know there's meaning in it. We know Joyce is, we know that, right? So it's really, how do we get into that? And I think what I said to myself was what I would say to like an actor who was approaching a really difficult passage, right? Where the problem sometimes is you get too caught up in the meaning of it and you forget the basic need for an action, right? So in this particular passage, it's like, all right, look, this is Anna Olivia, it's his wife, it's Earwicker's wife. This is a letter that we kind of figure out this is a letter that was maybe meant to be presented at the trial, but never got there. I'm not sure if I think that maybe comes up after this. But so it's like, all right, so what is the action here for reading it? And I was like, well, pretend that you're defending him in a trial and you're speaking to the jury, right? And so like I was like, all right, well maybe that gives me some way between those two extremes of like monotone and too much emotion, right? Just what's the action, right? Defend this in this way. And I can go on if you want, or I can shut up. I feel like I sometimes I talk way too much, but maybe a
I will
podcast
say,
is my
for our listeners, if you're interested in a wake themed drinking game, drink every time Neil is self deprecating or apologizes for being brilliant. Uh, uh,
They too will fall asleep and wake up in a place where people are talking about them in lists. Yeah.
it's really interesting hearing you sort of talk about your process because there's absolutely nothing wrong with the fact that you prepared because I think that's great and having a look over it. And I think the difference was fairly stark between your reading and our readings because for us it's cold and that's by design. We don't ever read ahead. And so the meaning in yours, I think, was very rich. And I think there's a real reward to that. And there's a real reward to rehearsal or to planning things out. And so our listeners may agree to go, oh, finally, someone who's actually taking this seriously. Uh,
He knows what he's saying.
well, what will be interesting, I think, to me is like I didn't like prep the whole thing, right? I read a few bits of it and then realized, oh my gosh, that reading's terrible because it's either too monotone or
Drink.
too emotional, right? Yeah. No, but like this is the point. I'll be interested to hear when I listen to it. My guess is the parts that I didn't prepare, but just had the simple action of like I didn't read it first, but I had the simple action of just like defend this person, right? Just that's the action. I think those will wind up being the clearest because I was out of my like an actor. It's not like an actor is not thinking about what's happening, right? They want the thought revealed. They want all those things, but you do have to kind of suspend that, right? And then take an action into this. And like the other connecting point for this, and maybe this is going too far afield, but is like how much this connects to me with Ulysses, right? Or the relationship. I mean, one of the beautiful moments in Ulysses is where, and this just sort of this disconnect between husband and wife. For Joyce, right? Whereas here, this letter that maybe in defense of him, but clearly, goes sprawling in all these different directions. It's not really a defense of him. It creates her own universe, and that dichotomy we'll see that play out throughout Finnegan's Wake. And in Ulysses, it brings me back to that moment when Leopold, Bloom comes home, right, and finds Molly at the end in the bed asleep, and he describes it this is before her great monologue at the end. He describes the imprints, like the imprint of his wife, and then the imprint of another form, male, or of another form, male, not his, right? And he describes the flakes of potted meat, and it's all like all these little details that make it really sad. And then we have her great monologue at the end, which is, this is not quite there yet because this is still building to the end. This is early on in Finnegan's Wake, but those disconnects reveal so much about both characters and about the world, and also the sense in which we try to make meaning of the world and are constantly grabbing at things that don't quite line up, right? And so I feel those parallels really kind of resonated here.
I love that. I also I also love that she recognizes that she's fine. Like she knows she's gorgeous. I highlighted when she says divine view from back to front. Like she's like, yeah, people tell me I'm good. Like, which just kind of further digs into the fact that like all these people are saying HCE is this philanderer, and she's like, I know I'm good looking. Why would he do that? you know but like you said, it does spiral into this. What I pulled from it was this conversation, particularly around female sexuality and their ability to be sexual. And like, you know you're assuming all these things about him, but like, what about my agency in
Yeah,
all of this?
And the Oxford World's Classic summary is quite useful because it really emphasises the fact that this is a new focus. This is so the investigation, all the things that we thought we knew, this is a new focus that comes from the letter. So this is from this Mama Festa. So I'll just go through just line by line or section by section just for our listeners. And obviously this casts us back to the previous episode as well. So lines 104 to 107.7. It's many titles, the many titles of the Mama Festa. 107.8 to 108.36, its authorship. 109, its envelope and the role of context. 110 to 113.22, where it was found, a Chapel Izod rubbish tip, and by whom, the hen. 113 to 119.9, its appearance, lack of signature, in various interpretations, its being undoubtedly genuine, and though always changing, it still has order. And then finally, 119.10 to 125, philological analysis, parodying an introduction to the Book of Kells, and the author finally revealed Shem the penman. So obviously, nothing to be taken particularly literally here. Obviously, things are epic in scope,
But I do love that section where it's like it talks about the way that language and meaning continues to change and shift and change and shift, and how it becomes relative whenever you need it, relevant. Sorry, whenever you need it, and like that part. While my brain was like, you know what this means, which I actually thought was really kind of self-referential to the book in itself, at least for me.
And absolutely, and I think it's. But then we can go like, look at that one word, Mama Festa, right? I mean, there's you obviously have manifesto, right? That obviously pops out, right? We know it's this, but we have a mama in there, right? She's the mother figure, the mama. We have Festa. There's the festive nature that connects some to the sexuality thing. We have Fest, right? Shakespeare's Fest, that the great speech that ends, in terms of the stages of life. So there's all of this stuff. And specifically related to marriage, right? The best speech, when that I was in a tiny boy, in a way, like so it connects all these things, and it's in one word, right?
And Festi King from the previous chapter,
exactly. Yeah. So the connection, so the connections. I mean, you could literally draw these maps of connection, but again, you can't get too stuck on that for a reading of it. Nor can you even when you're reading it to yourself, you'll have these moments. I think I've heard you guys say, like, you can't really stop every time you come to something, right? I mean, you do have to kind of.
You'll never get through.
You'll never get through it, and you won't really enjoy it, right? I mean, you almost like can't. You almost have to take the approach of like, what's the best way to learn a language? It's not to just go into the country, be bewildered for a little bit of time, but eventually you'll come out right. So there is some sense in which you are learning a new kind of language with this.
I thought it was interesting. You told me an anecdote, Neil, about a colleague of yours who spent a huge portion of their life working on a what was it, 10 pages? 15 pages?
And like accumulating boxes and boxes of notes. And this was like started out as like a PhD thing and just spiraled away. It led to like conflict with his advisor, or I forget all the details. This is when I first read it. So we're talking 20 years ago. I don't remember all the little components of it, yes, but definitely spent. And I remember the page. I mean, I can literally find the pages. I think it's starting on like the top of 293 is like costus your parn. You make what name, and in truth as a poor soul is between shift and shift ere the death live through. That piece right there. There's it's within that section you're talking about. I'm pretty sure it started at that 293, and then it goes, and that he literally just spent and he was someone who said, like, when someone asked him, well, why are you spending all this time at Fittingin's wake, his response was, what else is there? It was like there's not even like room for the question, because nothing is else worth one's time, right? And
it's not even the wake. It's 10 pages
right,
of the wake.
He would take the approach of you have to unpack this one. You can't unpack all 625 pages or whatever, 628 pages. You have to find something, and the 8 pages he chose were brilliant because of how much unpacking there could be done. And even for Joyce, I'm sure certain sections could be unpacked more than others. And this was certainly one of those sections where I can still remember some. There's like this the Sunday cloths, I think, the Sunday clothes and Santa Claus and all these things that, like, again, what I mentioned earlier, like, yes, you can overly intellectualize it. Yes, you can kind of reduce it to sound. And again, both of those are fine approaches. Anyone's approach into this is going to be, challenging. But it's when those two merge, right? It's when, like, sound and sense, when it all comes together, and like we hear that Sunda Claus. I mean, I remember that one word in that where it's like there are the and you start to see all the resonance, and it becomes like, again, the epiphany that we feel in our own lives when all of a sudden something hits, right? And like all of these things, and you can't even really articulate it, and there are elements of like solipsism in there. There are all these things that are challenging, and Joyce is literally trying to capture that. He's trying to capture that explosion of consciousness. And it's like, in actually, I mean, there was like a real arrogance about him in certain ways, but I think ultimately it was driven by this intense humility. And we see it in these two male characters in this, right? I mean, you mentioned the sexuality, TJ. I mean, Molly Bloom it was a similar thing, right? She's with all these different, the man we feel for both I mean, even though they were hardly, they were totally flawed, right? And HCE and Leopold Bloom, but like the pain when he, in the simple in Ulysses, imprint of a human form, male, not his, and then out the reading, this book here. So that he captures pain, I think, in such pain and time, two great subjects for literature, right? He captures those two things with extraordinary depth and feeling.
Yeah. And he still does it with funny turn of phrase, deliberately somersaulting off bisexical or whatever. I was like, that's funny.
Absolutely. And that I mean, that's, you mentioned, like, how, like, what was the influence for me, like with Joyce and then Beckett, is like you find those meanings by balancing the pain and the humor, right? Like the sadness and the, like, all those things come together, as they often do when we have those epiphanies, right? It's like you can't, otherwise you're too over serious, right? And it loses some meaning because there's not the perspective of, like, in the Fall of Icarus, right? Like it's people who are looking on and watching, the pain, right? So in order to capture the meaning in order to have those epiphanies, you have to balance the humor and the sadness and the pain and and that's the challenge that he's facing in terms of trying to capture meaning. And where I think a lot of we see this in young writers all the time, or any writer all the time, is like sometimes you hit something too heavy, and it's not like the problem isn't like, oh, you're saying I'm being too heavy. No. The problem is that you're not. I don't think you're achieving what you want to achieve, right? The word is doing, the passage is doing this, right? But you probably want a little more of this, right? And it's like, you don't want to be top down in that. Now I'm definitely babbling. So that drink point you're talking about, but I hope maybe one of you can save me here.
Well, there's one line that I want to say I feel completely reinforced your thesis about. This is him holding a mirror back up to nature, and it is and ironically, you read it. It says, "What bird has done yesterday, man may do next year. Be it fly, be it molt, be it hatch, be an agreement in the nest." And I was like, yeah, this is exactly what Neil was talking about.
It's I'm just so happy that you guys are doing this, because it is, especially because the way where it came from. I think it's actually great that you didn't start this with this, like, oh, look at us, we're gonna do Finnegan's Wake and we're gonna be like the authorities on this. You came from this at a place of like, you know what? As I think Toby said, like, I just, I want, this is a bucket list item. I'm just gonna try this. TJ, you're a dear friend. Can you help me do this, right? And then, like,
and I'm like, sure.
That's the place of innocence that I think is necessary, and why I think sometimes that word purist can spin us in the wrong direction, because it's like, you can lose out on so much of the innocence. Like, we have a culture of knowingness where people think they know too much, right? And that's why people want one-to-one correspondences with words and meaning, because it's safer for them to feel like they're on top of things. whether they're not, right? And so like this is like good medicine, you know. And please, I don't know if I want you to cut that word, but I want to take it back because it's
No.
medicine's the wrong, because medicine implies like it's not that you don't like it. It's not medicine. It's more like it's a great, this should be taught, right? It should be taught. It should be part, not medicine, but curriculum. It should be, it's a way. There was that, another I'm thinking of Flann O'Brien's That Swim Two Birds. It's another great Irish book, and he had a funny relationship with Joyce. But it was like, this is the sort of book, you know, you give to your sister if she's like misbehaving or boozing or something, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And there's this sense in this where it's like, this book should be read. It simply it should be, because if at the very least it should teach us that this attempt to just figure things out and then to be confident that we know what those things are is so devastatingly bad for our culture, because it just makes everyone so sure of themselves, and it makes people bad listeners, and not only to other people but to themselves, and it just leads to these spiraling things. Whereas this book, like, it shows you that if you take the time with it, oh my gosh, there's so much more to unpack about human life, and there's so much more to unpack about language and these attempts to understand.
And I think something that's really interesting is that he's not saying you can only enjoy it if you unpack it. You can also enjoy other, you know, you can enjoy turns of phrases, you can enjoy certain kinds of puns. I feel as though if it's medicine, then it's grape flavored medicine. So he's giving us he's giving us a few things to hang on to while we process. And so you can still enjoy some of the phrases. You can still enjoy the way that it's, because I think we started out as complete novices in terms of this book, at least. I mean, we'd both read a bunch of other Joyce, but and we're sort of becoming more and more accustomed to this. I think our reading is getting better as we go but I also think it's interesting that Joyce is, he never really wants you to get comfortable, because life is not comfortable. The world is not comfortable. And so I sort of, every now and then, I don't know if you had this experience, but sometimes when you're reading, your eye will skip down the page and you'll see, and it's like driving a Jeep through a war zone, and then you look ahead and you see a landmine down the road. You think,
you're like, what?
Oh, there's a landmine coming. I've got to, but not only there's a landmine ahead, I've got to think about the bullets that are whizzing around my head now, but down the line, there's a phrase there that cannot be expressed in the English language, and I don't know how I'm going to do it. Or look at all that, or look at all those Roman numerals. I've got to interpret those on the fly. Am I going to do it? You know.
Thank you so much for articulating the way my brain felt. I was like, I know this portmanteau's coming. I see it, and I'm like trying to dissect it while looking back at the word. But you know,
and then, or when thunder words come. And you're suddenly like, whoop, new thunder word coming. What's this one going to be? And I mean, there's some really interesting typography things in here, the upside down Fs, and you know, the different kinds of glyphs that are used within this. I thought your reading of the section of the letter that had been stabbed with the fork was beautiful, with all the sections that have been sort of obliterated out by the tines of the fork. I thought that was really beautifully done, and I think you really negotiated that tricky section far better than I did in my tricky sections.
But again, this goes back to like why the approach you're taking is so useful, because if you had started this out with like, we know everything, first of all, it would have been it's a false sense of assurance, one, right? It's because and it's also it doesn't track the passage of the book teaching you how to read it, right? You're supposed to start in a place of innocence in some sense, and then get further along in these. And to your point about both of you, when you say like, you know, you kind of feel like, okay, now everything's going to make sense and it's going to land and I'm going to get to these, and then like you're like lost in some things. But it's really, and that's where the epiphanies come in this book, and like the real, like, if you want to do like the architecture of it, it's the architecture of these epiphanies, right? You hit these moments where finally, and that's like real life, right? Because think how many times you feel like you're about to like land something, whether as a writer or whether as a human or whatever it is, and it just doesn't work out, right? It's like you fall down, you try to, but those moments when it does, when it crystallizes, and it doesn't crystallize because it's like easy. Usually it's because like it's been teed up by all of these challenges that, and it finally, and so it's the build of those throughout this, that when you finally do come to them, those are the teaching moments, really. And like, I guess I said, the last 10 pages, like when everything starts to like crystallize in these ways, still not to the sense of like one-to-one thing, but like you start to like be immersed into that world of being a human, right? Which is, I think, is what the reading of this is.
And then obviously the last word of the last page loops us right back into the first word of the first page.
The recirculation, yep.
So I think you've listened to more episodes than anyone now. I think in
I don't know.
preparation because
Maybe
you're
you
a
guys are
preparer.
undersell. I mean, I thought you said you were starting to build an audience.
We do have one, but
no,
one.
Yeah,
I don't know.
We have an
I
audience.
think we're really appreciative of everyone who listens. But I mean, in particular, you've in preparation for today, you I know you listened ahead to as much as you could. I mean, do you find that forgiving all of our errors as we read, but how do you find the experience of hearing it?
One thing that's really interesting, you give like the percentage that you've read, right? And like and it's a really interesting way to kind of frame this, right? Because you are trying to capture time, right? In some basic sense,
Mm-hmm.
with the book is trying to, that's a major theme in the book. You're trying to map onto that. It's like there is this kind of build of like, in my head, I'm kind of like, I wait for when this really crystallizes or whatever. And then it's like, okay, like you almost expect like, yeah, some crystallization, but maybe it's teeing up for more down the road. So what's interesting, when I listen to it, what's great about it is it feels like one of those really good classes, right? That you took where like everyone kind of sat in and like you didn't, and you were given time and space. It's not like, okay, we got to finish this by next Thursday. No, I mean, how long is it going to take you guys to do the whole thing? It's probably gonna be like a 3-month, I don't know, roughly by the time it's actually
I think
done.
probably a year.
A year.
I think we're
So
expecting about a year.
because there might be breaks. You might not be able to get to it, like there or whatever it is. They're going to be.
Yeah.
Oh, then you got to like put it out, of course, right? So there's a recording
Yeah.
of it. Oh yeah,
50,
the rate.
We think 50 episodes should get us through.
Of course, because that's where the time comes in. No matter how you record it, you're going to have to release it in these manageable chunks. So it is going to be probably, yeah, exactly, because the amount of reading is probably half total time. With me babbling, it's worse.
Great.
But the point is that, like, yeah. So, and that's a great way to think of it, right? It's a year. I mean, and again, connecting to Joyce and the way that the Bloomsday. I mean, going back to Ulysses, but there is that kind of cyclical thing. And so yes. So to answer your question, which I've not completely done, but hope I landed on something of, it does feel like one of those great classes where everyone starts in maybe at different levels of knowledge, and the teachers themselves, you guys who are running this thing, are coming at it from a place of questioning, right? And a place of curiosity, and even initial place of like, not, you obviously wouldn't be doing this if you were dismissing it, but a place of just like, look, I don't even, I don't even know, it's unreadable, as you say, it started. And then seeing that trajectory unfold is really cool.
Oh, and once we get to the night lessons sections, things like that, I mean, that feels a lot like coasting down a river and seeing the giant waterfall ahead and going, I don't know how we're going to manage that, and with all the footnotes and with all the parallel phrasing and things like. But
I hadn't looked ahead, and y'all mentioned those pages. I was like, "There's graphs in here."
That'll be fun. I mean, that's one you mentioned. Like, if you wanted me back, like that would be a fun time. I mean, because you even have,
no, you coming? Don't play, Neil.
You had the different peep, because that, of course, is a scene of. It is a perfect for a teaching moment with the kids, and so I think. Yeah, it's like it's all those things that are coming up, but the approach you guys have of not knowing is great, right? Because I don't think this goes back to Beckett's point when he's like, I can't even teach English because and this is maybe one of the most. I mean, Joyce and Beckett are my two favorite writers, and Beckett, I mean, just the sheer brilliance that he had, and then to be able to say that kind of line, and it's not like in any way meant to be false modesty. It's just like, listen, this is too, like, trying to explain how to write and how to read and how to do it and how to think. I mean, I'm trying to do that myself, and that humility is so important. So I think that is the driving theme of this podcast, is actually really cool because it, I think, taps into that.
We have taken up so much of your time, and I really appreciate you being here. And you're coming back, so this is not goodbye for you and Wake. We're going to drag you back in here to do more sections with us and to give us more insight. Because
especially when that graph shows up. Because you know what TJ doesn't do? Math, and I saw a pi sign on that. So
we'll use interpretive dance or something. We'll figure out a way.
The one time that we record video, you just see me in the background making shapes with my body, and then
don't say things that you can't follow through on. That's
who says I won't.
So that is all the time we have this week for Wake. We have been so delighted to have the incredible Neil Wechsler along for the ride this week. And as I say, we're going to have you back. I really want to encourage everyone out there listening, if you haven't heard of Neil, look Neil up. We will have links to Neil's work in our show notes that are on our Patreon page. Grenadine is a must-read. There's just like Finnegan's Wake, it contains multitudes, and you can read it as a fun little comedy, or you can read it as much more than that. And every time you read it, you'll get something new. It's honestly one of my favorite plays there is.
It's the play made me cry, and Asian fusion restaurant, because that was the day that I faked like I had a meeting at work, so that way I could go out and finish reading it, because I started reading it before I got to work. I read it all the way to work, and then I was like, I can't stop. So I was like, y'all, have a meeting downtown, and just sat in an Asian fusion restaurant and cried at the end.
Yeah, it's magic. I love it so much. So I'm so glad that and Grenadine was what brought Neil and I together, because I was working at a theatre company, and a colleague of mine said, hey, you need to read this play, and I'm so glad that they said that. So thank you, Neil, for being here today. It's a real treat.
You guys are the best. I'm so happy that you asked me to do this and that you're doing this.
Of course, yes. Yes, I've been Toby Malone, along with the unbeatable TJ Young. And once more, thank you to Neil for his time. Join us next week as we wade into uncharted waters, Chapter 1-6, The Quiz. See you there, Jeopardy enthusiasts. This has been Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, just to hear it out loud. If you've made it this far, thank you for your dedication. Join us next week for another segment of Finnegan's Wake and a chat about what we've found. Wake is a Moon Street Media podcast, engineered by TJ Young and Toby Malone. Our theme song is The Ballad of Perso Riley, arranged and performed by Meg Logue after James Joyce. Wake is recorded in Canada, where Finnegan's Wake is in the public domain. For community and bonus content, join us at our free Patreon at patreon.com/wakepod. If you have questions about Finnegan's Wake, don't ask us. We're just as confused as you are. See you next week.